Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners, the Wurundjeri and Boon Wurrung people of the Kulin Nation, on whose land I'm joining you today. I would like to pay my respects to elders past, present, emerging, and I'd like to extend my respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people of all nations of this land. I'd also like to acknowledge any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us for the webinar today. I'm Zoe. I'm a producer of school programs here at ACME, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to our series on multimodal generative AI with Leon Furs. Today's session will be on an introduction to multimodal AI. We'll have a few minutes for some questions at the end. We do have a Q&A function enabled, and you are able to upvote as well if you like somebody else's question and you'd like it to be answered. It helps gives us an idea about what people want to know. Will only be a short amount of time, so if we don't get through all the questions, we'll definitely aim to do that before the next session that we have. So I'd like to now welcome our presenter. If you were lucky enough to attend Leon's last series with us on demystifying AI, you'll know that he is a tour de force on everything AI. He's a fantastic educator, speaker, consultant, and a published author. His latest release is called Practical AI Strategies. Welcome, Leon. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Zoe. And I'll just second your acknowledgement of country and acknowledge the Gunditjmara Mara people as the traditional owners of the land on which I'm presenting from today, and pay my respects to their elders past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. If you were in last year's session, you will have caught up with all of this information, so I won't labour the point, but just to reintroduce myself, my name's Leon Furs. I'm a PhD candidate studying Gen AI in education. And prior to that, I was in secondary education for 15 years, including as a head of English, e-learning coordinator, and most recently as a director of teaching and learning. Over the past 18 months or so, I've been working a lot with schools and with organizations like ACME to run professional development, do advisory and consulting services around these technologies. Because it's safe to say that when ChatGPT was released in November 2022, it caught all of us off guard. My PhD had kicked off 2 weeks before ChatGPT launched, and we were thinking that generative AI was going to become a bit of a thing in education over the next 3 to 4 years. And when ChatGPT was released, that 3 to 4 year horizon shrunk to a couple of months. So it's been a busy 12 months, and we've had the release of the Australian framework for generative AI in schools since I ran our last ACME sessions. So schools are starting to get a bit of support and a little bit of a framework or guidance around these technologies. But generally what I'm finding in schools is that most people are still just treading water with these tools. So in this series, building on what I did last year, we're moving away from just those text-based models like GPT for generating text and language, and looking at multimodal generative artificial intelligence. Multimodal generative AI is a big part of my PhD, and I'm working with specifically secondary English teachers here in Victoria. So we'll be exploring what it means to create digital and multimodal texts with these technologies, and also what the implications are for teachers now that these technologies are here in our classrooms. So in this session, I'm going to introduce multimodal generative artificial intelligence. I'm going to introduce some of the concepts around that, including what multimodality actually means. Look at a little bit of how generative AI works, just to refresh things for those of you that either did or didn't attend last year's sessions, and then start to talk about some of the different modes that generative artificial intelligence can work with, including image, video, audio, and a whole bunch of other things. In this session, I'm just scratching the surface, and then in the following 2 sessions, I'll go into 2 areas in a lot more detail. So in the next session, I will cover video and audio generation in a lot more detail, including looking at what kinds of tools and technologies are out there right now and what they can do. And then in the 3rd and final session this year, I'll be looking at code and games design and how these technologies are starting to intersect with other applications like virtual reality, augmented reality, games design, and more traditional gaming platforms. As Zoe said, there's a little bit of Q&A at the end of this one. So if you have questions as we're going along, feel free to change those, drop those into the chat. And sorry, I've just had a message from Acme saying that the video quality's dropping in and out here. So let me just change this a couple of settings in the back end and see if we can improve that. Okay, we'll try that for now. If it continues to be a problem, just ping me again, and I'll see if I can switch again. Okay, so let's kick off by talking about what multimodal generative artificial intelligence actually is. For me, multimodality is it's a little bit more complex than just we can generate text and now we can generate images. So multimodality is about recognizing different modes of communication. And as humans, our communications are very rarely monomodal or in one mode. So when I'm talking to you, I've got intonation, I've got the tone and pitch and volume of my voice, which adds context to what I'm saying, gesture, facial expression, body language, all of those things work together to convey meaning. And in other areas, even in print texts, we have other things like layout, size, color, scale, the use of images alongside text, all of these things working together. In the context of artificial intelligence, we've been really focused on what ChatGPT can do. We've been focused on text generation. And if we take our eyes off the prize, we might miss what's happening in the background, which is that these platforms are becoming very deliberately more and more multimodal, which makes them more compelling, more believable, more realistic, also more close to how humans communicate with one another. There's also a couple of technical words there on the screen, transformation and transduction, which are important when we're talking about multimodal literacies. Transformation is shifting meaning within the same mode. So we're talking about taking text and turning it into some other form of text. For example, turning a written story into a written play. And this is obviously something that generative artificial intelligence is really good at. So we can use ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini or any of these platforms to endlessly change text from one form to another, change the tone, the register, make it more formal or whatever. But we also have transduction, which is changing meaning across modes. So this is where we might get text to image or text to video or audio to video and so on. So the reason that this is important is because different modes have different affordances, different modes have different ways of expressing meaning. There are some tools in some modes that aren't available to us as communicators, which might be available in others. So obviously, if we're creating text and we stick to pure text, we have limited options when it comes to things like spatial arrangement, color, and so on. But when we start to draw on all of these different modes, then our tools for creating become a lot broader. And this is why one of the reasons why multimodality is absolutely the near future of these technologies. They are more compelling, they're more engaging, they're also more persuasive. So for a critical or media literacy point of view, the more modes that we're drawing on in our communications and the more modes we're using these technologies to produce, the more compelling and persuasive these technologies are getting. So we will see, and I'll talk about this over the course of this series, we'll see an increase in these sort of deepfake technologies, in the use of AI to create misinformation, and that will become more and more compelling as the multimodal generative AI improves. So as the capabilities of video generation get better, or as the capability of audio generation gets better, we'll see a huge uptick in the amount of mis and disinformation being shared online. So that's something for us in education to be aware of. It means that we need to be on the front foot. We can't be sitting around waiting for these technologies to roll over the top of us. The other aspect of multimodality is that some researchers, such as Meta's chief AI officer, Yann LeCun, who is one of the most prominent AI researchers and created large wings of the AI field as a whole, particularly around image recognition. Jan LeCun and others believe that the next generation of AI, artificial general intelligence, AGI, will only be successful with massive multimodal data sets. And I'll talk about data sets in a moment. But essentially, the more data you can get your hands on, the better when it comes to these technologies. And the breadth of data and the scope of data that's available, if we start to draw on audio, video, and other sensory information, is enormous. So if I'm being cynical, I might say that's the reason why Meta is working so hard on getting its Ray-Ban sunglasses out there so that it can capture all of this extra video and audio data. I might say that this is why these technologies are becoming more and more ubiquitous, because we want to collect, the developers of these companies want to collect as much data as possible. So last year, when I introduced some of the concepts of artificial intelligence in education in the first Acme series, I used the AI iceberg analogy. And the AI iceberg analogy is also featured in my book, and it's talking about language models. And all I've done here is extend that logic out to include multimodal generative AI. So it's a bit of a simplification because not all AI is created in the same way. Some of the algorithms and some of the technologies behind image generation are slightly different to how a language model like ChatGPT works. But there's enough crossover that this analogy still makes sense. Basically, with any kind of large model, what we have is a huge amount of data below the waterline. So just like an iceberg, we can't exactly see what's in there, but we know that it's massive. We know that it's the biggest component of the entire model. Whether it's text, whether it's images, audio, whatever, the biggest part of this data set comes from scrapes of the internet. And then within different organizations, we have perhaps access to different data sets. So if you think about Google's Gemini model, for example, Gemini is a multimodal model. It can read video. And one of the reasons for that is that Gemini, owned by Google, has access to YouTube as part of its data set. Google owns YouTube. An image set like an image generator like Adobe Firefly might use an in-house set of images. So in Adobe's case, they have license for the Adobe stock library. So they can train their model exclusively on Adobe stock images, which is partly how they trained their Firefly model. And we're going to see over the next few years, particularly with multimodal AI, the big developers pulling off in different directions because they have different access to proprietary data. There are open source models out there that also need huge data sets, and they are reliant on open source data. But there are companies like Meta who own Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram. They obviously have an enormous amount of data from the 3 billion users globally that have Meta products. And they've just released their own multimodal AI as well. So the technology is ubiquitous. It's driven by huge amounts of data, and that data largely comes from the open internet, but also from those proprietary sources. Another thing that's starting to happen that people are experimenting with is training these things on synthetic data. So that means you generate some data, you create some data, sometimes with an AI, and then you use that data to train other models or to fine tune other models. And this we're seeing already happening with image generation. We know, for example, that in Adobe's library, a lot of users were uploading images that were generated in other image generation platforms like Midjourney. So that synthetic data is being used to train. There's a suspicion, we don't know this exactly because they won't tell us exactly how the sausage is made, but OpenAI's Sora video model, which we'll take a look at later, is trained on synthetic data, which is data that's been created in a video game platform like Unreal Engine. So a platform like Unreal Engine can create very realistic looking videos with realistic physics, realistic anatomy of the characters. And we can create videos to actually go into the data set to then train a video model. Sitting on top of the waterline, the model part of the iceberg, is the algorithm that's learning the rules of all of that data. And again, this is a simplification, but if you can imagine that whatever data you throw at these things, the algorithm, the model is going to be looking for patterns and connections to work out the probabilities and work out how to actually generate that content. So if it's text data, it looks at the probabilities of words occurring near to other words. If it's labeled images, it looks at the probabilities of pixels appearing in certain arrangements. And there are other techniques applied to image, video, whatever, but that's a solid basic logic. The little snowman on the top, if it's a language model, it might be something like ChatGPT, Copilot, Gemini, the application itself. If it's image generation, we might be talking about Firefly or perhaps something like Midjourney or Stable Diffusion. The snowman is the part that we interact with. So I just wanted to update and refresh that iceberg analogy from last year's materials to make it applicable across the board to multimodal AI. And what I want you to start thinking of, and over the course of this series, we'll sort of dig into this a little bit more, is that whatever we can generate data around, we can potentially train a machine learning or language-based model to interpret that data. So we're seeing generative artificial intelligence being applied to all kinds of things. Data that's being captured whilst people are wearing virtual reality headsets being used to train generative AI for robotics, for example. We're capturing data, anything that we can capture, we can interpret and generate a new version. Last year, we touched on image generation in the previous Acme series, and I just wanted to very briefly touch on it again because it's probably the area of all of these multimodal technologies that most people are already quite familiar with. That's because image generation's already embedded into a lot of those platforms that I spoke about. So if you've got access to Microsoft Copilot, you can use OpenAI's DALL-E image generation model. If you've got ChatGPT Plus, you can generate images in there. And now, even if you've got Facebook Messenger, WhatsApp, or Instagram, you can chat with Meta's AI and generate images just right there in the chat using one of its models. So image generation's already become quite ubiquitous. But I thought in this session, it's worth just touching on how far image generation has come in a very, very short time. So this is DALL-E 1 from August 2022. This is a slightly terrifying image, and the prompt is just teachers talking in a staff room. You can see what it's struggling with. You know, it's particularly struggling with hands, it's struggling with faces. This was predating the release of ChatGPT by several months. So this was one of the really early models that OpenAI released. But it does a few things okay. You know, the composition of the photo is okay. The setting itself is okay-ish. Kind of looks like a school staff room. But huge problems with generating realistic-looking people for a few reasons. One thing you notice is that both of these people are white. In August 2022, it would be really difficult to get any image generation model to do anything but generate images of white people because the majority of images in the data set were images of white people. It struggles with faces and it struggles with hands because in the data set, hands and faces never look the same. So when it's trying to interpret that data, learn the rules of the data, then it's struggling to reproduce that. Now, these are problems which existed in August 2022, but if we flash forward to October 2023, those problems start to disappear. So this is Midjourney. Midjourney's probably the most powerful or one of the most powerful image generation platforms out there. You access it through Discord at the moment, although they are launching their own website, but hundreds of thousands of people globally are using this to generate images. Ethically, it's a little bit of a nightmare of a platform because it does scrape a lot of unlicensed content. It's also possible in Midjourney to generate artwork or photography in the style of living artists and living photographers. So you can prompt for somebody's name and it will give you art in their style. And that even extends to relatively small scale artists, people who've got their work mostly on Instagram or their own website, because anything that's out there on the web has been treated as fair game for the developers of these models. So whilst Midjourney is certainly very powerful, very capable image generation model, it's not without its ethical concerns. It's also far less guardrailed than platforms like OpenAI's DALL-E. So for example, in Midjourney, when you generate images, you'll often find stereotypes and biased imagery, even discriminatory or potentially harmful imagery. It won't let you generate explicit imagery or incredibly gory or violent imagery, but unfortunately, there are plenty of other image generation platforms out there that will let you do exactly that. So image generation has come a long way since August 2022. We're already at the point where it's possible to make very, very convincing deepfakes of people. So, there are some issues with this image, and I haven't prompted particularly carefully to avoid some of those things. There's a few weird little quirks, like her eyebrow hairs are going in the wrong direction on one eyebrow for some reason. But it is absolutely possible in the most current version of Midjourney V6, to generate really realistic, really believable images from just text prompts. So in terms of multimodal generative AI, we're talking about text to image. Because you can already use voice assistants in these things, we can also treat that as speech to image. So we can generate images just using our voice. And it's one of the earliest and the most well-developed and the most well-established forms of multimodal AI. So it's already out there. A lot of people are using it, and it's becoming rapidly harder and harder to detect. Audio generation is sort of on the next frontier. There are some really well-established and quite capable audio generation models out there. And in the next session, I'm going to talk about audio generation in more detail alongside some of the video generation. So I'll just touch on it in this one. But with audio generation, we have to take into account things like voice generation, sound effects generation, music generation. And again, the premise is whatever we can take in as data, we can generate, reproduce, we can learn that, and we can create new output in that style. So if we feed an audio model lots and lots of tracks of music, and that music is labeled, whether that's labeled by humans or whether it's been automatically labeled through another AI process, then the model can learn what those music clips mean, how to break down that music, and how to recreate and generate synthetic music. Audio generation can also be used to synthesize deepfakes in much the same way that image generation can create fake images of people. Audio generation can create fake audio of people. So in this little clip here, I'm going to play you, you'll hear my voice, but it's the 11 Labs audio clone of my voice, which has been cloned from about 40 minutes worth of webinar recording. So not a particularly high quality audio source, but definitely enough audio for 11 Labs to generate a synthetic version of my voice. At the beginning of this, you're also going to hear a little clip of music, and that's generated in stable audio, which uses a library of stock music as its data set. So this one is licensed, unlike many others. And the text prompt is just something like generic technology podcast opening music. So you get the opening music, you get a little bit of me talking, and then you'll hear me chatting to one of ChatGPT's 6 voice options, which I've just recorded through my phone. So you're going to hear a few different variations on synthetic audio here. Welcome everyone to the inaugural episode of the Generic Technology Podcast. I'm your host, Leon Furs. Today we delve into the fascinating world of synthetic media and discuss the potential for human-free podcasts. Joining me is the enigmatic and always entertaining Fakey McFake, a self-proclaimed techno-optimist. Welcome, Fakey.
Thanks, Leon. It's an absolute pleasure to be here, and let's jump straight into the digital abyss.
All right, so these characters, whatever you want to call them, have totally fabricated, totally synthetic. The script is written by ChatGPT, so the whole thing is artificial. And you can hear, particularly with ChatGPT's voice, you can hear that it is synthetic. Now, I think this is deliberate on OpenAI's part. If you look at their image generation, it does the same thing. It always looks very computery because OpenAI don't want their technology to be used to create convincing deepfakes. So they don't want people robocalling with ChatGPT's voices. It does sound a little bit like a Siri style assistant. And 11 Labs is a lot closer to reality. So the synthetic version of my voice that you heard is definitely good enough to fool someone. We've also got music, like I'll just so Google's Music FX is a platform which can be used through Google's AI Test Kitchen. The AI Test Kitchen allows you to play around with a bunch of tools from Google. And this seems to be very much Google's approach, is to work on a few big products like Google Gemini, and then to release everything else almost like a little tool, a little toy that you can play around with. So with Music FX, we can generate little clips of music around 30 seconds long from a text prompt. So you can see the prompt here up on the screen: winter afternoon, cup of tea, smooth vibes with the slow tempo. And the music that you heard in the background there is what was generated. So like a little sort of chill hop soundtrack. Now, again, we suspect that Google could release much more powerful music models, but at the moment they're limiting themselves to little tools like this one and so this is, sorry, my music's going all over the place here. This is from Google Arts and Culture, but it still uses the same model. Google Instrument Playground is a tool that they've developed to generate single instrument tracks. Now, I'm just looking at this slide in the background here, and the audio for some reason is still coming in from the previous slide. So just bear with me for 1 second while I try to kill that. Go. A little harp music in the background. You can hear, again, it's a bit weird. We've got like a little synthesizer toy to play around with in this case. So you can use the keyboard or you can use keys on the keyboard. Generate ambient music soundtracks, generate little clips of music, and overlay them over the top of one another. So moving on from audio generation, in a moment, I'm going to talk about a few of the video generation opportunities that we have available to us at the moment. But in the next session, I'm going to look at a couple of audio generation tools that just emerged in the last couple of weeks, one called Udio and one called Suno. And Udio and Suno are capable not just of generating little music clips like you heard from Music FX, or little single instrument tracks like Google's Instrument Playground, but actually generating fully fledged music songs. So we've got 1 minute long tracks that have got lyrics, vocals, and lots of different kind of layers of music. But the issue with all of those things, obviously, is, again, where is that data coming from? So with Udio and Suno, that I'll talk about in the next session, we're going to be really conscious of where these organizations have actually scraped their data from, what kind of licensed or unlicensed content they've used, because there's a huge copyright question hanging over the head of those technologies. Okay, moving on onto video generation. Video generation is again, it's sort of on the very near horizon. We're on the cusp of video generation. I'm going to show you a couple of the more powerful models in a moment, but It's a little bit like August 2022 with image generation. It's still very early days, so it's a little bit sketchy at times. Runway is a platform that's been around since early last year, which uses a stable diffusion-based image generation model. As you can see here, you can access it through the website, you can access it through its mobile app, and it can be used to create short but fairly high quality videos by taking lots of clips. You take still images, you can use a text prompt and add a little bit of movement to those elements. So you can see here there's a few examples on the front of the website, but you can also go in yourself, start playing around with these straight away. If you can create a free account, you go in and you get a few free credits. And the way that you use it is you can either drag and drop in image, or you can actually create an image within the model itself and use it as a text prompt. Models like Runway basically work by taking a still image, whether you generate it or it's generated from text prompt, and then just adding a few extra frames as that image is slowly shifted through space. So Pika Labs is another one which works on very much the same premise. And as you can see here, we've got this sort of Van Gogh style image, and we just add a little bit of movement into that image. So Pika works on the same premise as Runway, whereby we take a still image and we can add a bit of motion into it. Now, both Runway and Pika are very soon going to be integrated into Adobe's Premiere Pro. So we've got an industry standard video editing tool that's going to get features from Runway and Pika available to users as a plugin, so that if you have a still component in a video, or you wanted to use a still frame and add some motion to it, you can do that right within Premiere Pro. If you have a bit of footage in the background that you don't want, you've got some objects in there that you don't want, you can use generative fill to get rid of those objects in the video, and you can use it to extend the video tracks or to add actual scenes which never existed. Another option for video generation is to look at these Hey Gen style AI avatars, and Microsoft have also just in the last few days released an avatar model. And Hey Gen and other platforms like this essentially do something similar to Runway. They take a still image, in this case a still photo or a still image of a generated avatar, and just like the one you can see on the screen there, they add a bit of motion. So they add a bit of movement, a bit of eye blinking, eye waggling, and some lip syncing. So they're still kind of in the uncanny valley, but we're getting very, very close to these things looking, again, really, really convincing, that sort of deep fake level of convincing. And finally, we've got OpenAI's Sora, which is the model that everybody's kind of sitting around waiting for at the moment. It's likely that this one will be available to ChatGPT Plus users before the end of the year. It's also another one of those plugins that will be offered through Adobe Premiere Pro. And Sora is hugely powerful in terms of quality. It's a massive step up on things like Runway and Pika. It can create much longer video clips. It can create videos up to a minute long. And again, we're just generating stuff from a text prompt. So the anatomy of our woman here, from the prompt, stylish Tokyo woman walking down a street at night. Legs are a bit bendy. The movement's a little bit uncanny and a bit awkward. But again, I want you to remember what image generation looked like in August 2022, and then flash this forwards by 12 months or 18 months. If you go onto the OpenAI website, you look at their blog, you'll see lots of examples of Sora. I'm also going to explore Sora in a bit more detail in the next session when we look at video and audio a little bit more. And you can see how artists and directors, short film makers, music film makers have been invited by OpenAI to create some videos with their platforms. One thing that is really clear and really important, talking to this audience looking at an Acme webinar, is that the people creating these videos still need quite a lot of expertise in order to produce something which is not just sort of technically impressive, but also meaningful. So you still need people with an artistic eye. You still need directors who are capable of thinking about how they want to frame their shots and how they want to arrange their shots. You still need people who are capable of coming up with a narrative behind these things. It's not good enough to just be able to generate any kind of video from scratch. We need all of those skills behind that as well. And then we have everything else that it's possible to generate. So I mentioned, image, audio, video are all technologies which are available right now. There are some things which are available now, but which we haven't really touched much in education. And there are other technologies which are kind of on the far off horizon, technologies which might not exist right now, but which people are definitely working on. So a few weeks ago, I wrote a blog post. The QR code on the screen there will take you to the post itself, just exploring how these tools might be used in terms of code generation. Code generation is just another form of language generation, and these models have actually been better at generating code than generating English language for a long time, because code is already very structured, and it's easier for the model to learn the rules of code. But that puts some really powerful tools in the hands of our students and in the hands of young people. In this blog post here, I'm just using a few prompts to encourage Claude to create a fully functional app. You can see the app there. It works on a mobile browser. It's just an objectives goal tracking app, but it's got a database behind it. It's written in some fairly sophisticated languages. It uses Python, HTML, CSS, and SQL for the database. I don't know enough about any of those programming languages to create anything meaningful myself, but in just a few hours kicking things backwards and forwards with Claude, I can use this to create something which is actually really successful. Because it's a multimodal app, it also has access to image recognition. So as I'm going through and developing the app and prototyping things, I can upload screenshots and photos, and it can actually read the information from that image and continue to help out and give advice. Speech recognition is technology that we've had for many years now. And for those of you that have ever used Siri or Alexa or anything like that, you know that speech recognition can go terribly wrong, sort of laughably wrong most of the time. Siri is absolutely hopeless. But all of those platforms and applications are going to get an AI boost over the next few months. So in iOS 18, we're going to see Siri updated with some language model capabilities. We're already seeing AI being incorporated into Alexa and Google Assistant. We're going to see Microsoft Copilot replacing Cortana. And this will mean that we're talking about speech to anything instead of text to ... So at the moment, it's very much contingent on prompting these things with text. We use text mostly when we're interacting with ChatGPT, but it's already possible to talk to these models, and that's getting more and more common and more ubiquitous across these technologies. So I'm really positive that the way that we interact with computers is going to change quite significantly over the next few years, as societally we become more used to actually verbally chatting with these technologies. So Siri at the moment, hopeless. Give it 6 months once it's underpinned by some of Apple and possibly some of Google's technologies, and I'm sure that we're going to see some massive improvements on that front. And then we've got image recognition. The models that I've already mentioned, most of them already have image recognition built in. So both ChatGPT Plus and Microsoft Copilot use OpenAI's GPT-4V model, which is a reasonably powerful image recognition model. And Google Gemini and Claude 3 also have image recognition built into them as standard. So we're getting multimodal models that can now read the world around them. I mentioned earlier, we're getting this technology built into things like Meta's Ray-Ban sunglasses. So I'm sure many of you have seen those. And we're going to see more and more of this type of technology where wearable tech and cameras are being used to capture a lot of data. And then in the third and final session in this series, a little bit later on this term, I'm going to be talking about video games, which is another one of those kind of applications of this technology that's definitely not there yet, but that's on its way. So these little obnoxious infinite looping GIFs that you can see on the screen here are from Google's technical paper for a model called Genie. And Google Genie is a text to platform or image to platform generator. So they've created a platform where you can upload an image and it will turn it into a very short little sort of 10-second long playable game by putting some of the interactivity into the image itself. And I think we're going to see more and more extensions of this kind of logic, whether it's through using artificial intelligence to generate games from text or using AI to generate the components of games. I'll talk about some of that in the third session, generating non-player characters, generating the skins and the textures for 3D characters, or generating all of the 3D assets themselves right within a game's development platform. So this session was just a brief introduction to multimodal generative AI. We touched on the iceberg idea and how the data contributes to these things. We looked at image generation very briefly, a little bit of video generation, audio generation, and then into what is also coming next. So things like the confluence of speech recognition, image recognition, code generation in games. Make sure you join us in the next session if you want to go a little bit more deeply into the video and audio side of things, and the third one for video games. And for now, I'm going to throw back to Zoe if there are any questions. Zoe, if you've got any questions, or if Acme have got any questions, or if anyone who's joining us have any questions.
There hasn't been any questions answered. Probably everyone's just absorbing all of that fantastic information. We did have a bit of a discussion, my colleague and I, just then about animators and how animators might use these new technologies as well. I guess it is probably blurring into next week's content, but as in, shortening animation is a very labor-intensive process. It can be, but also a lovely process for some people. But could it potentially shorten those kind of times for frame rates and making, all those small movements and things like that, potentially?
Yeah, I think on the horizon, anything that can be automated will be automated, basically. So any of those kinds of lengthy processes, and I've done a bit of animation myself in the past. So anything where you're kind of stitching together, hundreds or thousands of frames just to end up with a couple of minutes of footage, there might be interesting new ways to deal with some of those things. And this is going to apply across so many industries. So, we will talk about video more in the next session, but if we just look at what's coming out in terms of audio tools, Adobe's just set to release a new tool, which it's calling the Photoshop of music, which uses generative AI tools to generate things like instrument tracks, some of the loops, some of the components. And if you've ever used software like Logic or Ableton or any of that kind of music editing software, it's got a profoundly steep learning curve. You can do great things with it, but you have to invest a lot of time and energy. And so I think, what AI will do is it will allow maybe for the barrier to entry to be lowered for a lot of those things, whether it's animation, film, music. And the people who are doing, the real kind of craft at the top end will still learn to use those really sophisticated, really powerful tools and get the most out of them. So we're probably going to see a lot of that.
Do you think, I know many of us out there also have a creative practice. Do you think as artists we need to potentially be better coders as well, so we can use the tools to the level of sophistication potentially that maybe we would if we did something ourselves without AI?
I've seen some really interesting things recently. I've seen an interesting conversation pop up recently around what artists can do to kind of protect, but also make the most of their art in this kind of environment. And we know that, artists are being sort of indiscriminately scraped, and their intellectual property and their copyrighted property in some cases is being consumed by these huge models. And one really interesting thing that I saw was the idea of artists protecting their own artworks, but also training smaller or fine-tuning smaller language models on their art and then licensing the use of the models. So, in terms of artists using the technologies in ways which are beneficial to themselves, not just about creating art the old-fashioned way or creating art within sort of closed communities without the use of generative AI. There might also be opportunities in there for artists to push back against the big developers and actually create some of their own smaller, more sort of niche models, which they are then directly benefiting from.
Yeah, but I think it's really interesting and yeah, lots more to come, I guess. We're just about out of time. So if there's no more questions, and also I should say, you're welcome to contact us at education@acme.net.au if you have any more questions for Leon that pop up over the week. We will send a recording of today as well. So if you missed out on any part of the session, you can go back. Thanks, Leon. That was a fantastic introduction. We do have another 2 sessions. One is next Wednesday on, as Leon said, we're talking about creating videos. And the final session on May 15 is about generative AI and video games. Both sessions I'm really looking forward to. Thanks again, Leon. Always a pleasure. And we will send everyone the correct link for this session beforehand. So thanks, everyone. And thanks, Leon, for joining us.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.